Welcome back, young and old, to another epic episode of Mac Music Review. In this episode, we're looking at the best albums in 2011. If you've seen any of my other best of the year, you know I'm going to start it with the honorable mentions, kind of rapid fire, and then we're going to get into the top 10 best albums of 2011. Let's do it. My first honorable mention is the album 21 by Adele. It's a solid pop album. That's all I gotta say. Pop isn't really my thing. If I did like pop music, maybe it would be in the top 10, but it's just not a genre that I end up caring much about ever, unless something is really phenomenal, like a Grimes album, like Art Angels. But unless it's like that, it's hard for me. It's hard for a pop album to crack my top 10. Vice Versa by Switchfoot is a very strongly loved fan favorite Switchfoot album, but I've never been a huge Switchfoot fan, and so the album doesn't resonate as much with me. I think I actually like Fading West a little bit better, but it is an okay album. It's not a bad album. King of Limbs by Radiohead. I don't care about Radiohead, but this is a good album. Section 80 by Kendrick Lamar, his debut mixtape, shows a lot of promise. It's not super polished, and it could be a lot cleaner, and it could be a lot more, I guess, succinct and it could be more well crafted. But there's still a lot of promise, a lot of talent. It's still a very, very good project by Kendrick. And then you have The Long Surrender by this indie group, and maybe a duo, maybe a band, called Over the Rhine. Really beautiful, really sad, elegant indie music. Singer-songwriter indie music. If that's your thing, I recommend checking out. It's called The Long Surrender. The band is Over the Rhine. The Reckoning by Need to Breathe is a great southern rock / folk album with some Christian underlying themes. It's a good one. Check it out. Also, Hurry Up, We're Dreaming by M83. A really great album that is very long, and eventually everything kind of does blend together. It's hard to distinguish some of the individual tracks when you just listen to it all in one piece. Maybe with repeat listens, this album could crack the top 10, because it is a really great album, but it's just not, it's a little bit long, and I'm not feeling like every single piece of it is really making a big impression. That is all for the honorable mentions. Let's hop into the top 10. My number 10 is Suck It and See by Arctic Monkeys. It sounds lewd, but don't skip this album just from the weird title and the very simplistic album artwork that's just the words Suck It and See. But it's a really great, straightforward for Arctic Monkeys. I'm going to say straightforward for Arctic Monkeys because the songwriting on this is so much Arctic Monkeys. It's these insane, not necessarily metaphors, but these insane poetic lyrics that are just wild, but also, kind of romance themed. And they're just stuff that couldn't be written by anyone but Alex Turner. It's just the most, it's just Arctic Monkeys doing their thing and doing it extremely well for like 12 tracks. There is a cool shift in the tone as the tracks near the end. They get a little bit slower, but all the songs work very well. I mean, this one really surprised me by how good it was. So check it out. Torches. It's where my YouTube profile picture comes from, is this album, Torches by Foster the People. It's an extremely nostalgic album for me, one of the most important albums for me in my love of music. It's one of the first albums I listened to all the way through. It kind of, opened the doorway to alternative and indie music. And I'll always be grateful for that. But it's not an amazing album. It's not amazing. I think it is great, but I think there's a few tracks that are not quite as great as the other tracks. But still, there are songs like Miss You, Helena Beat, frickin' Houdini. I mean, it's got Pumped Up Kicks on it. Like, a lot of great tracks, but, a few of them fall a little bit short. But still, the highlights more than make up for it. This is an awesome album. Codes and Keys by Death Cab for Cutie is a weird one because the fans hate this album. I am a massive Death Cab for Cutie fan, and I absolutely love this album. I can see why people hate it. This is the one that you could describe as the most overproduced Death Cab for Cutie album, because usually their stuff is pretty simple. I mean, think of songs like Soul Meets Body, which is just, very simplistic and, just a guitar and just singing the words, and there's not much else going on. But this is just very much, you know, the vocals are kind of lost. The mixing of the vocals is kind of makes them more muffled and less clear, except for moments where the clarity shines through and it's kind of like beams of light shooting out of the dark, kind of gloomy looking album cover. But I think the songwriting is intact on this album. I think the music is really great and very ambitious at some points, and I think it's very successful. The only song that really falls flat is the last song, but even then, I would argue that there is a lot of merit in that last song, even though I would say it's the worst. You know, there's some things about it that make it a good closer. I don't want to ramble about this album. I could talk about this album for like a while. Anyway, next album, Strange Mercy by St. Vincent. St. Vincent's pretty good, man. She's a pretty good artist. This has some pretty great songs. I'm talking Cruel. Cruel is such a banger. You know, Chloe in the Afternoon, Surgeon. I mean, basically, most to all of the songs on this thing slap pretty hard. Like, I think it's even more consistent than her self-titled album, which I really, really like. I think she has a really great self-titled album. But this one that came out before the self-titled album was released in 2014. This is easily one of my favorite things she's done. Probably my second favorite St. Vincent album from all of her stuff I've heard, even though I haven't heard, you know, a ton of her stuff. She is a pretty prolific artist. This is a really cool album if you like pop music, if you like more a little left-leaning pop music, a little bit, you know, outside of the box. I would highly recommend this album. Boney Bear's self-titled album is his best album. Don't at me. This is the best thing he's done. I am not a huge Boney Bear fan. I never have been. I think he has a nice voice. That's about it. Except for this album, because this album is just really beautiful. It's really elegant. It's very spaced out. It's cool the way the songs are kind of about places, and you know, it has a certain feeling to it. There's a certain emotion that's carried throughout this album. And you know what? All of the albums following this on this list carry a certain feeling and emotion, and they all convey it pretty well. But one less so, as you'll see. But this is a really, really great album. I think probably by a long shot the best thing Boney Bear has ever done. Helplessness Blues is my number 5. It was Fantano's number 1. It's a beautiful, elegant Fleet Foxes album that is just so much Fleet Foxes. And you could say that this album is more conceptual and more focused than their, you know, the debut album Fleet Foxes. But I like the Fleet Foxes debut way more than this. I mean, that album to me is near perfection. I absolutely love their debut album. But this, if you like Fleet Foxes, then you will like this. If you like any Fleet Foxes albums, then there's no way you're not going to like Helplessness Blues. It's them doing their thing, but with this, you know, these lyrics focusing on millennial dread and kind of capturing this feeling of anxiety, but also with super beautiful music. And it's just beautiful folk, you know, chamber music, and it's beautiful. It's really, really nice. Even slightly more beautiful and more lively than, because Boney Bear, this album is more like quiet and more subtle, and this one's a little bit louder and a little bit more overtly like full of life. But great album. Kaput, possibly the best Destroyer album. Destroyer's been making music for a long time, but this is the album that everybody talks about. In the 2010s, Poison Season gets slept on, Have We Met gets slept on, but everybody talks about Kaput. Everybody's always like, oh dude, Kaput, that album is like amazing, dude. That album is amazing. But if you've kept up with my best of the 2010s, you know that I really like Destroyer. I mean, in 2015 and in 2020, his albums ranked kind of high on those lists, but this one ranks even higher because it's a masterpiece. It's fantastic. If you like Destroyer, then this is once again gonna be up your alley, with really effective, strong songwriting, really strong vocals, and really strong music. He has horns on some of these songs that just create all these different feelings, but it's not as focused. The feeling that this album creates, it's more like all over the place, but there are some strong feelings and emotions communicated through the Kaput's music and lyrics and extremely expressive vocals and unique vocals. But the other albums in this top 5 are all more specific feeling. as you'll see with my number 3. That number 3 is Let England Shake by PJ Harvey. This album is phenomenal. I mean, it totally took me by surprise. I listened to it. I knew this album is super hyped up. Like, everybody talks about this. People talk about the best albums of 2011. Everybody's talking about Let England Shake. Everyone's like, oh, that album is so good, dude. Dude, Let England Shake is crazy. It's an amazing album. And you know what? The hype is so real because it's such a good album. It's so good. I mean, it's a little bit crazy to me that there's 2 albums that I think are even better, that I personally enjoy more. But this is a very dark, weirdly disturbing, and unique listening experience. Like, the way it talks about England and the way it talks about war and violence and death and the kind of spooky vibe, even when the music sounds a little bit more upbeat. It's all very eerie, and the vocals really contribute to it, and the songwriting as well. Everything about this is spot on, and it's a really fantastic album. My number 2 is All Things Bright and Beautiful by Owl City. I think this is the best Owl City album and the last really amazing album. He did make what I will consider to be a really, really great EP. I think in 2014, the Ultraviolet EP. It only had like 3 or 4 songs on it. But this album captures the Owl City magic in the best way, with lyrics that reflect on his sense of magic and wonder, but also connect it to spiritual elements. There's several songs, Angels, Galaxies, and Hospital Flowers, that religion and spirituality is injected into it. He also, wide-eyed wonder and romance in songs like Deer in the Headlights and The Yacht Club. And it's a really wonderful album. The magic is more real on this, I would say, than even with, and the orchestral instrumentation, the use of strings, I think, is one of the things that really brings the magic of this album to life. It's a really wonderful album. My number 1 is an album that not a lot of people have heard. It's a very indie album. It's not something that a lot of people have heard, like I just said. It's called Love and War and the Sea in Between by Josh Garrels. And you know what? It's definitely one of the best albums of this decade. And I didn't include it on that list because I wasn't super aware of it. I was aware of this guy. I'd heard one of the songs from this, Revelator. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say the name of that song. But I heard that song before. And I just recently listened to the whole thing, like front to back. And it's incredible. The songwriting is incredible. The music is just unbelievable. The vocals are just unbelievable. The closest thing I can compare this guy to is Sufjan Stevens. But like Sufjan Stevens, if he made a concept album, and this is something he would do, about being like on the sea, in like being like a Greek on the oceans, and running into like mythical beasts and meeting women on the islands, but if you're a Christian, from a Christian perspective, there's a rap song. It's one of the best albums of the 2010s, maybe one of the best albums I've ever heard. Love and War and the Sea in Between by Josh Garrels. Just check it out. And that's all I have for you guys today. I'm sorry it took so long to make this video and to upload it. It's literally just because I had barely heard any music from 2011. Really, literally, on this list, the only albums that I had really heard and were comfortable with before I made the video were All Things Bright and Beautiful, Torches, and Codes and Keys. Those are the only 3 albums that I was really familiar with. I had to listen to all of this music a lot, and I've been really busy with work every day. I've been working like every single day, and other things going on in my life. So it's been hard to like take the time to listen to music, and I've had to listen to a lot of music. I had to listen to all the honorable mentions a lot to get a feel for if they should be on the list or not. It's just this. I think this is the most homework I've done for any of my top 10 albums of a year because all at once. Because usually I'm listening to, I'm already familiar with a bunch of albums released that year. For some reason, 2011, I hadn't heard much music from 2011. It was a similar case for 2014, but to be completely honest, I just didn't put as much work into that video. I didn't put as much listening to the albums in that video. I just kind of listened to it a little bit and was like, hey, I got a general feel for it. But this is the most work I've had to do in terms of listening to music for a video. Thanks for watching the video. Have a great rest of your day.